Interview, it's been a cornerstone of journalism for over 130 years. We've all read them, we've all seen them on TV. But behind this format that we see every single day, there's actually this fierce debate about what it even is. Is it a noble art form, or is it more like a vicious crime? Today, let's get into that story. So what's the big deal here? Is an interview really a quest for truth? A way for us to understand the world through the eyes of its most interesting people? Or is it something darker? A kind of intrusion, a violation of privacy, where a person's inner world gets packaged up and sold? And believe me, people's opinions could not be more split. On one side, you have this idea of the interview as a noble art, a legitimate source of truth. But then you have the complete opposite view, that it's a vile crime, an intrusion that actually diminishes the person being interviewed. And look, this isn't just some academic debate. Some of history's greatest writers have had very strong feelings about this.
Okay, so first up, let's hear from the prosecution. For a lot of brilliant creative people, the interview isn't just a nuisance, it's a full-on attack. Get this, the Nobel Prize-winning author V.S. Naipaul said that some people are literally wounded by interviews, that they lose a part of themselves. It's almost like that old belief that a camera could steal your soul. That's a pretty heavy way to think about what's supposed to be just a conversation, right?
And if you thought Naipaul's take was intense, oh, just listen to Rudyard Kipling. Yeah, the guy who wrote The Jungle Book. He didn't just call it rude or annoying. He flat out called it a crime, an assault. He felt it was just as bad as being physically attacked. And he wasn't just being dramatic. His wife actually wrote in her diary about how their entire day was wrecked by a couple of reporters. But here's the really funny part. Years before all this, Kipling himself actually interviewed Mark Twain. So I guess it depends on which side of the microphone you're on. This next one, man, it paints such a visceral picture. The novelist Saul Bellow, even though he often agreed to do interviews, described the feeling of it like this. Like thumbprints on his windpipe. Wow, you can just feel the pressure, the violation in that image. And the list just keeps going. Lewis Carroll, the creator of Alice in Wonderland, had a just horror of the whole process. H.G. Wells called it the interviewing ordeal. So yeah, the interview as assault camp definitely has some heavy hitters. But that is only one side of the story. So what if all those guys had it wrong? What if the interview isn't an assault at all? What if it's something totally different? Well, to figure that out, we need to meet a guy who kind of turned this whole debate on its head. The Italian professor and novelist Umberto Eco. Now, long before he was a household name, Umberto Eco was a huge deal in academic circles. He was a professor of semiotics, which is basically the study of signs and symbols, how we make meaning out of, well, everything. He was a serious thinker.
And then 1980 happened. Eco drops his first novel, The Name of the Rose, and it just explodes. We're talking more than 10 million copies sold worldwide. All of a sudden, this brainy professor from Italy is a global literary superstar. But here's the thing. Even after all that fame and success, Eco didn't really see himself as a novelist. When people asked, he'd always say, "I consider myself a university professor who writes novels on Sundays." For him, his real job, his true identity, was always academic. So that begs the question, right? How did this one guy manage to write these incredibly dense academic works and these blockbuster novels? Well, an interviewer asked him that exact question once, and his answer, well, it changes everything. Eco's answer was a total head-scratcher. He just said, "I am convinced I am always doing the same thing." Wait, what? How is writing a scholarly article on medieval aesthetics the same thing as writing a murder mystery? It doesn't make any sense. So, of course, the interviewer, probably as confused as we are, had to ask the obvious follow-up, which is, okay, so Eco had this secret weapon he called interstices. It just means the little empty gaps of time in our day. And he claimed he was so productive because he used these gaps. He'd even say he could write a whole article just in the time he was waiting for an elevator. While the rest of us are just scrolling on our phones, this guy is crafting a masterpiece. But his real secret wasn't just about being good with his time. It was about seeing everything as a story. See, back when he was only 22 and writing his doctoral dissertation, his professor pointed out that he wasn't just presenting facts. He was telling the story of his research, including all the dead ends and wrong turns. And that was his aha moment.
And that's the absolute key to understanding him. Eco realized that everything he wrote could be a narrative. A dense academic essay wasn't just a list of facts, it was the story of an intellectual adventure. For him, there was no hard line between scholarly work and fiction, because it was all storytelling.
So, what in the world does all of this have to do with interviews? Well, as it turns out, everything. Because if anything can be a story, then maybe an interview can be one too. Look, let's be real. Kipling and Bellow, they had a point. Interviews can be invasive and uncomfortable, but we also can't deny that they are an incredibly effective way to communicate. It's how we get so much of our information about the world. This quote from Dennis Bryan just hits the nail on the head. Almost everything of moment reaches us through one man asking questions of another. I mean, just think about that for a second. It's the engine of how we learn about pretty much anything important. And this brings us right back to Umberto Eco. For him, an interview wasn't some kind of assault to be endured. No way. It was an opportunity. It was a stage. It was another chance to do the one thing he was always doing, telling a story. So the next time you read an interview or watch one on TV, ask yourself this: what story is really being told here? And more importantly, who's the storyteller? Is it the interviewer, the person answering the questions, or are they creating something entirely new together, a story that couldn't exist without both of them?